Well, hello everyone. I'm Naveen Agarwal, and I'm so excited to welcome all of you today to our live session. This is going to be such a great conversation today with Bijan Ilahi. So I welcome you all. We have a global audience today. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are joining from. I really appreciate you taking the time out from your busy schedule and attending this live session. So folks, those of you who are joining for the first time, let me tell you just a little bit about what these live sessions are all about. Our whole purpose here is to share knowledge and engage with each other. Risk management of medical devices is hard. So these sessions are not supposed to be technical sessions, but rather more of a conversation about big topics, understanding what the challenges are, what the best practices are, and learning from the best of the best, like Bijan. We're going to have a conversation with him today. It's a recorded conversation, so we're going to listen into that. But good news is that Bijan is available today on the panel, and he will be happy to answer your questions during our conversation today. So make sure you use the Q&A box to post your questions anytime. I will be running a couple of polls just to engage with each other, get your feedback and perspective on a couple of things. But let me start by just touching upon only a few housekeeping items. First, I want to remind everybody that this session is being recorded and it is a public forum. So please be courteous and professional in our conversations. And know that nothing we discuss today should be taken as regulatory advice. The purpose here is just to have a conversation, share common challenges and best practices. So with that, I'm actually going to start our recorded conversation that I just had with Bijan. And we'll take it back on the other end when we finish. In the meantime, there'll be a couple of polls, and I really encourage you to participate in those polls as well. So let's just take a look. Well, hello everyone. I'm so happy today to sit down with Bijan Ilahi, and it's such an honor and privilege to introduce him to you today. Bijan is a well-known expert, a global expert on risk management of medical devices. Currently, he is a technical fellow and a corporate advisor at Medtronic. And he advises across the board in different business units. And as you can imagine, this gives him an opportunity to see risk management in many different medical areas, not just one. So he has tremendous experience in application of risk management principles. He has seen it all, the good, bad, the ugly. And we want to talk about that. Most importantly, Bijan has written a wonderful book, Safety Risk Management for Medical Devices. In fact, this is how I got to know him. Because when I started early on in my career, I did a Google search on the best books on safety risk management, and his name popped up at the top. This is how I got to know him. And over time, I was very fortunate to get to know him on a personal basis. He also teaches at the Eindhoven University in Netherlands, and now at Drexel University on the invitation of the FDA, where he's teaching graduate students about safety risk management. So we'll talk all about that with Bijan. Keep your questions coming as we are talking about this. So Bijan, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with me and have a conversation about risk management and your experience. I'm sure we can learn a lot about your real-world experience. Before we jump into risk management, Bijan, I'm just curious to hear from you what led to this path that you are on right now with risk management, with a heavy focus on risk management. Could you share a little bit about your journey from your early career as an engineer and then transitioning into a full-time role as a risk management expert?
Yes, Naveen, it's a pleasure speaking with you. I always enjoy your sessions online, and your work is really great. So thank you for inviting me to speak with you. To address your question, yeah, I've been an engineer for over 40 years now, and I started in aerospace engineering. I worked in aviation and then space at NASA on the space shuttle. My focus originally was systems engineering of aviation systems, but gradually my focus started to go into safety, and this really started from the Space Shuttle Challenger accident. At that time, I wasn't working at NASA, but NASA realized that they need overseers. So my boss at the time, who used to be the chief engineer during the Apollo moon landings, formed a small group of 12 people. I was one of those 12, and we were evaluating all the space shuttle systems, including software, propulsion, hydraulics, electrical, mechanical, everything. And were evaluating the flight worthiness and readiness of the spacecraft. So before each launch, we would get together and would collectively decide should the shuttle fly or not. This was as a result of the Challenger accident, as I mentioned. This is how I ended up safety. When the Soviet Union fell apart, NASA's main customer, which was the Department of Defense, said that they don't need as many shuttle launches because they don't need so many spy satellites. And the budget of the NASA is decided every year by the Congress. So I knew that there's going to be less work to be done. And at the time, I was giving lectures on safety of space systems. And I happened to run into somebody at one of the conferences from a medical device industry. So they asked for some assistance and said, aviation and aerospace has had about a 40-year head start on safety over medical technology. So I gave some advice to them, and then another company came and asked for advice and so on. And eventually one of them just asked me to just join them full time. And so I did. And that's how I ended up going from aerospace to medical. So then at medical device industry, I was doing systems engineering, design of class 3 medical devices, mostly implantable pulse generators like pacemakers, defibrillators, and deep brain stimulators. And then because I was always still the person to be in charge of risk management, I started teaching some classes to my fellow colleagues. And then just kind of moved on from there to becoming a bigger and bigger and part of my work until now, which is my full-time job, training and consulting all over.
That's amazing. So do you feel like your early experience as an engineer prepared you or positioned you in a certain way to look at risk management a little bit differently?
I think so. Engineers are analytical and logical thinkers, and risk management has that aspect. There is the analytical aspects, the logical thinking. I sometimes actually think risk management is like a cross between law and engineering, because you need to create arguments that why does the benefit outweigh the risk? Why is this device safe enough? And these are the type of arguments that the lawyer has to make. Mm-hmm. And then you also have to do the analysis and the computations to support your arguments, and that comes from the engineering. So I find it quite a fascinating field. It's like a interdisciplinary endeavor.
Yeah, that is actually awesome. So Bijan, in your book, I very early on in the second chapter, I believe, you show a cartoon of an over-engineered robot, right? Something like that. And it's interesting for me that you will open your book with a conversation around over-engineering. And that's why I wanted to ask you, in the context of your engineering background and all other experiences that you have seen, what prompted you to think about that over-engineered situation and how it affects our approach to risk management in the real world?
Interesting that you ask, because I teach risk management. I've trained over 6,000 people now, and I found in all the times that I've trained people that people typically tend to operate out of fear instead of knowledge of risk. When you don't know how much risk there is or the nature or the size of it, you tend to overdo things. And this is that cartoon is about over-engineering. If you don't know really how much risk there is, you apply as much engineering resources to it as possible. And then you could actually adversely affect the device, adversely affect its benefits, its usability. Sometimes you could even make it more risky if you really overdo it. One of the tenets of my teaching, my classes, is to operate out of knowledge, not out of fear.
That is awesome. And it reminded me that it seems to be the approach from a compliance side too. It seems like we are operating with a mindset of fear from a compliance point of view, and as a result, we are over engineering our procedures and templates and forms and documentation structure. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I think that happens, but I don't blame that part on the operating out of fear of the unknown, the fear of unknown risk, but rather out of fear of, am I going to be able to persuade this regulatory auditor or reviewer that my device is acceptably safe?
Yeah, so I think you're bringing up a very good point about how people feel about risk. This is the whole area of research I'm familiar with, the perception of risk or the feeling of risk. And it actually governs our behaviors and practices. And part of the reason why we find ourselves in this situation with risk management in particular seems to me that this operating out of the fear idea, whether from the engineering side or from the compliance side, that we are really not, we are doing it without even being aware of this feeling of perception. So you have seen two industries, right? You have seen the aerospace industry and you have seen the medical device industry. What is their general perception about risk in these two different industries?
Aerospace has a different view, in my perception or experience, and it's that in aerospace, the idea is to eliminate risk. So they look for elimination of risk. In the medical device industry, we recognize that risk will not be eliminated. So instead, it's managed, which I think is a better view because trying to shoot for zero risk is impossible. It's a huge task. But if we can show that the benefits of our device exceed or outweigh our risks, then it's a more reasonable approach.
So benefit risk, I think we have to make a judgment based on benefit risk. And of course, it's a judgment. We can use some analysis, we can use data, but it's a judgment. So in that context, I wonder how people deal with the scenario of as far as possible or as low as reasonably practicable, all these terms that are being thrown at us. How do people actually treat that in practice when they are trying to make that decision?
Of course, the intention for medical device developers is to reduce risk as far as possible. Of course, that's only one of the approaches that ISO 14971 offers. We have as low as reasonably practicable or as low as reasonably achievable. But companies that sell products worldwide, and in Europe in particular, they aim for the as far as possible approach. Mm-hmm. And as far as possible means that you're shooting for zero, but you recognize that's not achievable. So you make it as small as possible. I find that a lot of companies really struggle with this because as far as possible is a nebulous target. Mm-hmm. You don't know if you're there. And so people are trying to come up with different ways of rationalizing the endpoint logic. How do I know when to stop? Mm-hmm. How do I know it's as far as possible? And one of the nice things that EU MDR offers us is to reduce risk as far as possible without adversely affecting the benefit-risk ratio.
Yes, yes.
So this is a reasonable thing that people can rely on to say, well, I'm going to reduce my risk as much as I can until a point where my further risk reduction is actually adversely affecting my device in terms of benefits or use or reliability.
Yeah, definitely. And hearing you talk about this basically tells me that we really have to sit down and look at everything as a whole. We can't be doing this work or analysis at the component level or at a piece by piece level. We have to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, I mean, risk management really can't be done in isolation on components or parts or assemblies. It has to be done at the system level, including the human interaction and other devices that interoperate with our devices. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so we have to look at the big picture, really.
Right.
So in this context, can you share your perspective on what you saw in the aerospace industry, how people really look at risk and make these decisions versus how they are doing it in the medical device? And I know medical device industry is very broad and very diverse, but you are the right person to ask that question because even within
Yeah.
Medtronic, you have seen a whole world.
In aerospace, and of course, I actually say that it's been almost 30 years since I was in aerospace. Now I've been in the medical technology for this long. But they don't even use the word risk. They use the word mishap, which is not a word that we use. This is from Military Standard 882, which is currently in revision E. And mishap is essentially an accident, something you don't want to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And for aerospace, it's typically loss of aircraft or spacecraft or loss of mission. Those are the type. They want to avoid those. So they look for places that some factor, some maybe missing requirement, inaccurate requirement, or other failures could lead to a mishap. For us, a mishap could be maybe interpreted as something like harm.
Mm-hmm.
So in the medical technology, what we look for is what is the risk of harm? Not that we want to prevent a harm, but we want to know what is the risk of harm and how low can we bring that risk. If we can bring that number to zero, then of course we have prevented the mishap or the harm. And life has shown that you can do all you can, but still something could happen that you did not predict, you did not anticipate. And so it's broadly accepted that zero risk is not achievable, but it's a good goal.
And expectation is that it's a continual improvement.
Of course, yeah.
Right.
That's why we do post-market surveillance, and we to continuously learn and improve our risk management, our product designs, our manufacturing. So in fact, the latest definition of state-of-the-art requires us to not just rely on the existing levels of risk or the gold standards, but to continue to look for the latest available practical technologies, practices, and knowledge to continuously improve our products. You mentioned something about the perception of risk and acceptance, levels of acceptance of risk. I wanted to touch on another adjacent topic, and that is critical thinking. The way that people perceive risk varies depending on many factors. And this perception is what drives the benefit-risk ratio, because this is, as we know, it's called the stakeholder concern.
Mm-hmm.
So stakeholders are human beings, and they're governed by just the natural ways that human minds work. So it depends on the kind of device that you have and the type of risk that it presents. People generally tend to be more tolerant of risks that they can take voluntarily than involuntary. So if someone chooses to partake in a dangerous activity and there is risk because it's voluntary, they're more tolerant of that risk. They tend to be more tolerant of natural risks than man-made sources. So if somebody naturally develops a disease, well, it's just life. But if somebody receives harm from a man-made device, a medical device, they're less tolerant of risk of that man-made. People are less tolerant if something is because of negligence. So if a company is doing the best that they can and there's risk, that's more tolerated than if it's shown the company was negligent. Also, people are more averse to risk when it has to do with vulnerable groups. Mm-hmm. So if we are making a device for pediatrics compared to a device for adults, the level of risk that the stakeholders are willing to accept for pediatrics is lower. So we also need to be aware that among all of the work that we do technically, there's also the human side, who are the stakeholders. The stakeholders, of course, are many, including regulatory agencies, notified bodies, insurance companies, governmental agencies, ourselves, our own companies. Yeah. These have to be taken into account.
Yeah, so I think what you are saying here really is that the whole notion of benefit risk is not a fixed or a static thing. It is relative to the target group, the stakeholders, their expectations. So I think that's one of the reasons why risk management becomes a little bit challenging, because we can't really apply one formula for everything. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just a formula, a mathematical formula. You can say, okay, I did my calculations. I've reached my expected risk limit, and I'm good.
Yeah.
There's so many things.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it becomes a little bit challenging in medical devices, because the diversity and the range of medical devices, the therapeutic conditions they are treating, is so broad. So that's why this whole idea about how you're going to evaluate risk, how you're going to do benefit risk becomes important. So I've been lately I've been very interested in taking a deeper look at the challenges in the industry, the real world challenges. What makes it so difficult? So I'm actually running a poll on LinkedIn right now where I'm asking people what are the challenges they think are barriers in effective implementation of risk management principles. And these are early results. 40% of them are telling me that it's company culture. So let's talk about that a little bit.
And now, talking about culture, that's actually a very good point. Company culture is influenced by the top management. And top management, the way they are, the attitudes, trickles down and influences layers of management all the way down to individual workers. And there have been some cases in history where it's been shown where a top management that is, say, conservative can make the whole company conservative and risk averse. And converse of that is a company that is risk tolerant. And if the top management is risk tolerant and more cavalier, the same will trickle through the whole company and changes the culture of the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this context, actually, I'm very curious to learn a little bit more from you, because in your book, you mention that one of the unintended or unanticipated side benefit of risk management is communication.
Oh, yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about how you think, if we do risk management right, can help improve communication and maybe even inform top management, where there might be some opportunities to actually set the tone right. Nobody wants to really say we want to make unsafe products, and nobody also wants to say we want to shut down the business. We have to find the right middle ground. So tell me a little bit more about how this communication can be improved if you do risk management right.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, risk management is a multidisciplinary endeavor. It requires skills from many areas. We mentioned engineering, regulations, so regulatory, clinical aspects, toxicology, materials, mechanical engineering, software engineering. All kinds of disciplines have to work together to make a medical device. So it requires that these people come together from these different disciplines to working session and work with each other. When we talk with each other, we sit together at the table, knowledge is shared that could enlighten people in ways that can help improve the product. I have experienced this personally multiple times. In one product that I was developing, we were developing a product that was novel. It was something that hadn't been done before. And so we engineers were imagining it was an implantable device, how this device was going to be implanted by surgeons. Based on our imagination of how it was going to be implanted, we were designing the product. So then we had a meeting where we had people from clinical group and marketing people that attended the meeting. These people were familiar with similar devices and how they were being used in the operating room. As we were showing them our concept, they told us right away that this is impractical. This is not how surgeons handle devices. With that knowledge, we quickly changed our design and changed our prototypes to something that was actually feasible to be used.
Absolutely. And that's why, communication is so important. And we have to help each other understand from our viewpoint, different viewpoints, what kind of risks may be associated, what would work, what will not work. And that is the magic of risk management, in my opinion, when you work together with people. So Bijan, I know you have trained and educated and coached and mentored over 6,000 students. I was curious to learn from you if you can remember or recall a question that someone asked you, which you felt was very interesting, something out of the ordinary about risk management or anything else. Can you share anything that someone has asked you over the years that has really kind of made you pause and think about, hey, this is very interesting topic to think about?
Yeah, so I have had questions. A lot of times these questions come in areas of skills areas. For example, in the failure modes and effects analysis, as those of our audience who practice and failure modes and effects analysis, they know that it's not an easy thing to do. A lot of questions come up as to like, well, how can I identify an end effect? How do I identify cause for a failure mode? And then how do I connect all of these things to risk? To create a picture where things are connected and they make sense, it's one of my pleasures.
Yeah.
Because in fact, that was one of my motivations for writing my book, was to create an understandable and explainable method to do risk management. So not only the workers can do it, but also they can explain it to somebody else.
Yeah. So it's the how questions. I think it's the how questions that are always so important and interesting for us to think about. So Bijan, I had another question for you. If you had a magic wand today that you could wave and say across the board, this is one thing that I would like medical device industry to do to become exceptionally superior in risk management than any other industry, what would you do?
A magic wand that I would use would be maybe an elementary thing, is that to make sure people across the board understand the language of risk management. Mm-hmm. Because I've found that generally there is confusion in the use of the vocabulary of risk management. What is a hazard? What is a hazardous situation? What is a harm? It may appear simple. These are just simple words, right? But the way that the English language is spoken is not the same as the way the language of risk management is. In fact, they sound alike, but they're not alike. So one simple thing that I would like for the industry is a uniform and consistent understanding and use of the language of risk management.
Oh, that is so insightful. We could wave a magic wand and say, by magic, everyone now has a really good understanding. In fact, the other 40% in my survey are pointing to limited understanding or limited competence in the risk management discipline. So culture and understanding, they seem to be driving these challenges. So I think you are spot on with that. I really appreciate it. And that actually brings me to my next follow-up question with you. If you were advising a very young engineer who is just about to enter medical device profession, or let's say someone who aspires to really become an expert in risk management, what kind of advice would you offer them?
Well, first, they should make sure they are passionate about this topic, because it's hard work.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a passion for it, you could wear out and you could run out of steam and not continue. So make sure you have a passion for medical device safety. And then also, if you want to succeed in risk management, you need to be able to communicate with many different disciplines. You need to be able to be conversant with, for example, mechanical engineers, software engineers, electrical engineers, toxicologists, clinical investigators, physicians, nurses, regulators, so many. You really need to expand your horizon and not just say, if you're, let's say, an engineering graduate, well, that's just step one. There's much more that needs to be done. Are you willing, as a young person who's entering, are you willing to stretch yourself and learn more about these other disciplines? You don't have to be experts in all of them, but you need to be conversant, because risk management is the integration of all of this work, all of these different disciplines.
Yeah, it seems to me that really knowing enough about different disciplines to be able to ask the right questions could be an important skill for someone who wants to aspire to be a professional, an expert in the risk management function.
Oh yeah, there's, as you mentioned, that I thought of another quality that would be useful and that's humility, because when you have humility, you recognize that there may be things that you're not seeing, or there may be aspects of your system, hazards that you had not anticipated. Humility opens your mind to receive help from others. So, but of course, this is not something that you learn in school. It's a personal quality, but that can be developed and practiced.
But it seems to me then, Bijan, we can close the loop here, because if a company culture supports and values these types of skills, it'll, by I'd say logic, progress much farther along on this direction of better risk management, because culture is all about influencing behaviors. And if we can encourage people to take a risk, be humble about what they don't know, be able to admit what they don't know, continual learning, be able to speak with each other, don't create silos. So it seems to me that if a company culture promotes these types of behaviors, it would be very suitable for excellence in risk management. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course, this is not just risk management, but in all aspects of product development. Engineers, or actually all people that work in medical device companies, should not fear making mistakes. Because if they have that kind of fear, they would self-censor, they would limit their own abilities. You use the word risk, and people should not be afraid to take risks, but this is of course different from risk from medical devices. This is about not fearing taking a step forward. Maybe this is not the best step, but if you're humble and somebody gives you feedback, then you recognize, well, this was not a good step, but you had at least endeavored in a step forward, in progress. Your next step would be the right one. Maybe some of the steps are not right, some of them are right. But eventually, a company culture that rewards and celebrates people, whether they are correct every time or sometimes they make mistakes, it I think engenders a more progressive company, more successful company, and better products, of course. We build into our products our personalities, ourselves. It's to me, it's kind of like cooking. I don't know if you have heard this, that a cook who loves cooking makes tastier foods than a cook that doesn't love cooking.
Yes.
Have you heard that?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
So the love that the cook puts into the food is like us engineers. The love that we put in our work goes into our products and manifests itself. Better products come from people who love their jobs. Yeah. And of course, company culture supports that, in allowing engineers to love their jobs.
That is so awesome. And Bijan, it might be interesting for you to hear that you brought up cooking. And one of the activities that I do with my daughter, who is now in high school, we have been doing it for a couple of years, is sometimes we cook together. And from very early on, the two things I told her was, do not be afraid to try new things, even though the recipe doesn't ask for it, and cook with love. So it is so amazing for me to hear that from you, because the way, and I think you make this point in your book also, risk is not something we do at work only. Risk is part of our life. How we live our life is a reflection of what we think about risk. And we bring that to our work as well. So this is just fascinating for me to get this perspective from you, and really appreciate your insight, especially about the skills that are required to be successful in this career. So Bijan, what's next? What's next for the industry? Where do you think it is heading? We live in a very complex world. And what's next for you? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Next for the industry, I see progressive improvement in product safety and understanding. This is one of the things that I'm really happy about, is that notified bodies, regulatory agencies, are becoming smarter about risk management, and then they are expecting better from industry. Notified bodies and reviewers, they're just human beings like the rest of us. They're not gods. So they are also improving, and their improvement is helping drive the industry to make safer and better products. I see that across the board, and I'm quite happy about that. And I see the quality of risk management is going up all the time because of this. As for me, as it's interesting. I find that the area of risk management, the domain of risk management, is it may seem like it's not a big domain. It may seem like just a little part of product development. But as I go deeper into it, I am just amazed at how much depth there is to it and how much more there is to do and more to learn, more innovations to do. So I think probably another book for me is in the future, as my own knowledge is expanding and all the time. I would like to share what I learned with the rest of the world. So I expect I'll be writing another book later on.
Oh, knowing you, I'm sure that will be just a fantastic book and a gift to the world. I personally appreciate what you are contributing to this discipline. And just by coming in and talking so openly in a forum like this, sharing your knowledge and perspective and wisdom more than anything else, acquired over 3 decades now, is really very amazing. And we are all really thankful about that. So Bijan, as we close, do you have any closing comments or thoughts to share with our colleagues in the industry?
Yeah, I think just recognize that risk management is a really broad area. Don't be afraid to foray in adjacent areas, learn more about these areas that come together for risk management, as I mentioned, such as areas of regulatory or clinical, all aspects of engineering that are involved. And one thing that I think we should recognize is that is about how we interact with regulatory agencies. What we do with our work of risk management and writing our risk management report is really an act of persuasion. We are trying to persuade a notified body that our product is worthy of being approved. So when you write a risk management report, write it in such a way that it's clear and understandable to somebody else. One of the areas that I've seen deficient in a lot of groups, a lot of engineers, is the quality of writing. The documents that are written, and in particular, I'm talking about risk management report because this is written for the consumption of an outsider. Quality of writing is not good enough to make it easy to read and easy to understand documents. So I'd say my one advice would be write well, and maybe have somebody read your writing and give you advice. Do they understand what you wrote? Does it make sense? You go a long ways when you write well.
Oh, that is such an amazing, brilliant suggestion and advice, Bijan. I will personally take that myself and really be more thoughtful and understand how to communicate a message, right? By the time you write the risk management report, your work is done.
Yeah.
You are not going to go and do more risk analysis, more evaluation. And you said it right. It's an act of persuasion. We are not trying to mislead people. So I don't want us to misunderstand this. Mm-hmm. You are not trying to mislead regulators or other people. You're just trying to persuade them. And you won't be able to persuade them if you don't communicate well, if you don't write well. You have to do a very good work on that and get it checked. That is a great advice, Bijan. Thank you so much. Very insightful. I really want to thank you for your time again. This has been just wonderful opportunity to sit down with you. And I'm just like feeling so good in my bones right now. I'm just soaking up all this wisdom from you. Every time I connect with you, which I'm very fortunate to know you on a personal level, I come back with so many insights. So I really want to thank you again and appreciate all the work you are doing in the industry.
Thank you, Naveen, and I appreciate your work too. I think you're really contributing a lot to the industry, to the risk management people and risk management industry. So thank you for your work as well, and thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Well, there you have it, folks. Now, I have listened to this conversation multiple times, and every time I listen to this, I learn something new. So a recording of this conversation will be available to you to watch later, share with colleagues, whatever you want to do. This wisdom that is available to us through Bijan's insight is going to be available. So I invite you to continue participate through these discussions, view these recordings, share your comments and opinions on LinkedIn. I really want to thank you all. Thanks to Bijan too for taking the questions during the session. I hope you got some of those questions answered, but keep those questions and comments coming through our conversations on LinkedIn and other future discussions. And if you have a question or specific topic of discussion you want us to focus on, we'll definitely take that up in the future. Now, before you go, I want to share with you some additional free resources, those of you who may not be aware of them and are joining for the first time. So very quickly, I want to walk you through those. You can go to my website here, www.achieveexcel.com, free stuff. There's a knowledge sharing forum. Over 200 industry colleagues are already there. Please consider joining and participating in the discussion. You have a lot of best practices and insights to share with us. Don't hold them back. There's a hazard analysis template you can download. And if you would like to, you can schedule a 30-minute chat with me, one-on-one, no strings attached. My intention here is to connect and collaborate with you. With that, I want to close our session today. Thank you once again for joining. Everybody, have a good week. Due to my personal commitments and travel, we will not have a live discussion next Tuesday, but we will resume the week after. Thank you again for joining, and I look forward to connecting with you again.